Hello and welcome to World News on TVP World with me, Ashim Kumar. US and Russian officials are set to meet in Saudi Arabia next week to discuss ending the war in Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy said that Ukraine was not invited to the meeting and would not engage in talks with Russia without consulting its strategic partners. According to Trump's special envoy for Ukraine, Keith Kellogg, Europe will be consulted but ultimately excluded from the talks between Russia, Ukraine and the US. Speaking on Saturday, Kellogg blamed the failure of the previous talks on the involvement of too many parties. Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, spoke with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov on Saturday to discuss the situation in Ukraine and, according to Moscow, the removal of unilateral barriers put in place by the previous US administration. During the upcoming meeting in Saudi Arabia, Rubio will be joined by National Security Advisor Mike Waltz and US Special Envoy to the Middle East, Steve Witkoff. French President Emmanuel Macron is calling European leaders to an emergency summit in Paris to be held next Monday. This was announced by Poland's Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski on Saturday at the Munich Security Conference. According to the Polish Foreign Minister, European leaders are expected to discuss very seriously the problems caused by US President Donald Trump. French Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot, who attended the Munich conference with Sikorski, did not confirm or deny the information about the emergency summit. Later, Sikorski reported on social media that Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk would attend the meeting at Macron's invitation. In an exclusive interview for World Talks on TVP World, Elisabeth Braw, Senior Fellow at the Atlantic Council, shared her concern about the exclusion of the European Union from upcoming peace talks on Ukraine. Here's her take on why this development is not only a setback for Ukraine, but also for Europe's role in shaping the future of the region.
The US has already staked out a position for itself in those talks. And what's more, Keith Kellogg, who is the retired US general who's advising Trump and being his messenger to Ukraine, he said just today that there is no place for the European Union in these talks. So presumably it will be the United States, Russia and Ukraine, and it would be massively regrettable if the European Union were not given a place. But apparently the Americans have made their minds up that that's not going to be the case. Now, one would also think that Ukraine would have a voice in the matter, but I think, unfortunately, Ukraine can't dictate anything at this point. So it looks like a not particularly positive situation for Ukraine. And it's also regrettable from the point of view that the European Union, as your viewers well know, is already a key supporter and helper of Ukraine, not just when it comes to military support, not just when it comes to diplomatic support, but in having given and continuing to give refuge to millions of Ukrainian refugees, Poland being the leader in that activity. And that, one would think, would give the EU a voice in the matter of how this war ends and what happens after that.
In the latest exclusive interview with Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski at the Munich Security Conference, we discussed US Vice President J.D. Vance's concerns about Europe losing its democratic values. Sikorski shared his thoughts on Europe's different approach to freedom of speech, migration and campaign finance rules.
I want to draw your mind back to US Vice President J.D. Vance's address. He says he's not as worried about Russia and China as the risk of Europe losing its democratic values. Your thoughts on that?
Europe is a democracy. We have a different attitude than the United States to freedom of speech. In the US, it's almost absolute, whereas in Europe, we have libel laws. So there is just a difference here. He was right that migration is a concern for electorates everywhere. But another difference is that we have campaign finance rules. So, for example, in Romania, he cited the case. One of the candidates declared that he was spending zero on the campaign. Actually, someone was spending on his behalf huge amounts of money by our European standards. So these are just differences. But on the whole, it's part of a democratic conversation. Slight pity that President Vance did not communicate his strategic vision in the area of security. This is a security conference.
What did you make of that? The fact that he barely mentioned Ukraine, he didn't really talk about defence, but instead took a totally different tack. To some, they were shocked and surprised by that. Were you?
We were relieved because there was some press speculation that he might announce cuts in US military presence in Europe, and he didn't do that.
February the 15th was the hardest day on the battlefield so far in 2025, according to the military analysis project Deep State. The main intensification of the Russians' activity was around Pokrovsk, Kurakove and Velika Novosilka. Deep State map shows that more than 250 combat clashes were reported on Saturday. Deep State Map is an open-source intelligence interactive online map of the military operations of the Russian and Ukrainian armies, created by volunteers on the day of the invasion. Germany's President Frank-Walter Steinmeier had harsh words on Friday for the United States, saying that the Trump administration is ignoring established international rules. The comment came during a speech at the Munich Security Conference. Sasha Farbach reports.
The snow and frigid temperatures in Munich aren't just affecting the conference attendees. They're also a fitting backdrop of the chilly state of the transatlantic relationship between the US and Europe. After weeks of mixed signals from Washington, Germany's President Frank-Walter Steinmeier had a message from Berlin.
What is certain is that the new American administration has a different worldview to ours, one that has no regard for established rules, established partnerships and trust.
As Europeans continue to face and deter an aggressive Russia and Ukraine, in a war now entering its third year, Vice President Vance sees other threats as more pressing.
The threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within.
As Germany's elections are just a week away, Musk and others close to Trump have recently endorsed the far-right AfD. Vice President Vance snubbing a meeting with the current chancellor in favor of the AfD's party chairman, Elisabeth Braw, a taboo in Germany, leading to bipartisan condemnation from Germany's political leaders.
We respect the presidential elections and the congressional elections in the US, and we expect the US to do the same here.
That is why we will not accept outsiders intervening in our democracy and our elections and the democratic formation of opinion in favor of this party. You can't do that, especially not between friends and allies.
Any new chancellor of Germany will face a range of challenges, continuing the modernization of a military that is still lagging behind. Some experts doubt that Berlin has what it takes to lead Europe against a mercurial Donald Trump.
I don't think at the moment Germany has the maturity or the capacity to do it alone and sort of be the first voice, as Kissinger said, about who do we call in the EU.
Germany has tried to adapt to new challenges. Days after Russia invaded Ukraine, Chancellor Scholz announced his sea change, 100 billion euros for the German armed forces. The country's president, however, says more must be done.
When dangers grow, our ability to defend against these dangers must also grow with them. We will have to spend significantly more than we agreed back then. There is no way around this. And any new German government will have to create the necessary financial scope for this.
As elections loom, Germany faces a crossroads. Will it rise to the challenge or freeze under pressure?
15,000 people took the streets of Frankfurt on Saturday in protest against right-wing extremism ahead of the upcoming parliamentary elections. According to recent polls, Germany's controversial right-wing of Alternative for Germany party is expected to take second place. The rally, under the slogan "Choose Love and Democracy instead of Hate and Discrimination," was a part of a nationwide campaign by the Christopher Street Day movement, which celebrates diversity and tolerance. According to the local police, the demonstration remained peaceful and proceeded without any incidents. US President Donald Trump issued a statement over the ongoing hostage crisis in Gaza, stating that Israel must decide what to do regarding the deadline for the release of all hostages by Saturday noon. While initially warning of severe consequences if the hostages were not freed, Trump later clarified on Saturday evening that the decision now rests with Israel and the US will support whatever action Israel chooses to take.
Saying we are not going to release any more hostages. And then yesterday they said they are going to release the hostages.
Trump's ultimatum came amid the recent release of 3 hostages by Hamas, including an American citizen. However, questions remain about whether this will lead to continuation of the ceasefire with Israel. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office refusing to give a clear answer on the matter. According to Israeli reports, Netanyahu is set to convene a meeting soon to discuss the next steps in dealing with Hamas. A source within his office mentioned that recent government communications have been unclear, but described this as a deliberate strategy. The hostage exchange is just one element of the fragile ceasefire agreement, which has been in place since January the 19th. While the truce is set to last until early March, the prospects of extending it are becoming increasingly uncertain, with pressure mounting on Israel to take decisive action. Following the 6th swap between Israel and Hamas, many Israelis are worried that the shaky ceasefire agreement will not hold long enough for all hostages to be released. A group of protesters demonstrated in Tel Aviv on Saturday, voicing their concerns about the hostages still remaining in Gaza. The death toll
We're very excited to see 3 more hostages back home today, but we are very worried from how this deal is going to end up, because from what we hear from our government, they don't want to go for the second phase of this deal, which means to leave too many hostages behind in the tunnels. Many of them are still alive. We know what they're going through over there. We know they are suffering and being tortured down in the tunnels.
I hope that our government will not harm this phase 2 and that they will start the negotiation right now. There is nothing more important than bringing them back home. So I am afraid that something will go wrong with the phase 2. I heard that today Trump said something to Benjamin Netanyahu, and yeah, I am afraid.
Yeah, it's a very complicated feelings. We are very happy with each hostage is coming back, but there is so many that still left there. Some are still alive.
The death toll from the Israeli attacks on Gaza has risen to 48,264 after 25 bodies were uncovered in the last 2 days. Close to 112,000 people have been injured during the Israeli offensive. According to the UN's estimates, around 70% of buildings in the enclave are completely or partially destroyed, and approximately 50 million tons of debris, including human remains, unexploded ordnance, asbestos and other hazardous substances are currently scattered across the Strip. A January 30th report by the agency estimated that more than $53 billion would be needed to rebuild the infrastructure. The report was released just days before President Trump announced his controversial plan to expel Gaza residents and redevelop the territory. Trump's plan has been met with global backlash and has been rejected by Palestinians. And that brings us to the end of this news bulletin, but stay tuned, lots more coming up. Goodbye for now.